That afternoon, while the sun was setting in shades of orange and gold, I carefully left the envelope on the table in the hotel room. It wasn't just an envelope, inside it, the truth pulsed, raw and undeniable, ready to explode everything that remained of what had once been a marriage. I knew that as soon as she and her lover entered that room, their world would never be the same again. And perhaps not mine either. For weeks, I ignored the signs. The empty excuses, the averted glances, the appointments that came out of nowhere. But something inside me changed that morning, when the phone vibrated with the detective's confirmation. Photos, messages, dates, the betrayal was right in front of my eyes, impossible to ignore. The weight of it crushed me, but at the same time, something in me rose up. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It was something much more dangerous, the determination to end it in the most calculated way possible. The plan was simple, but effective. There would be no confrontations in the heat of the moment, no shouting or tears in front of strangers. Everything would be done in the devastating silence of the truth. Do you want to know what it's really like to lose everything? I muttered to myself as I left the hotel, my heart beating at an unbearable pace. The silence in that room would be filled with something neither of them could have predicted, the cold, implacable evidence of their choices. The photos, as clear as daylight, and the letter that accompanied them, with words they would never forget. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay, I wrote, ending with what could only be read as a final blow. The words danced in my mind as I waited outside the hotel, unseen but close enough to imagine their reaction. The sound of the door opening, the rustle of the envelope being opened, and then the inevitable moment when reality would hit them like a violent wave. I could almost hear their breath catching, the tension materializing in the air. And it was then that I realized something that was perhaps more painful than the betrayal itself. Even after everything, a part of me still wanted to understand. Why? How can someone look into the eyes of someone they claim to love and yet destroy everything they've built? I knew I'd never have a good enough answer, but that didn't matter anymore. They had made their choices. And now it was my turn. But did everything end as planned? Or did fate have one last card to play? A twist I could never have predicted? Welcome to our channel, where intense stories of love and betrayal come to life. Here, we never support any form of betrayal. Our aim is to show how these acts can destroy lives and relationships. All the stories are fictional, but they carry real lessons about the consequences of human choices. Get ready now for a shocking narrative, full of twists and turns and emotions that will grip you from start to finish. Good story. The morning began slowly, with the soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air as the sun's rays pierced through the thin curtains of the master bedroom. Nicholas tucked himself into bed, feeling the emptiness next to where his wife, Clara, would normally be. It was one of those days when he woke up before the alarm clock, with a strange restlessness in his chest. Despite the apparent tranquility of the house, there was something subtly out of place in his routine. Clara was in the kitchen, looking lost as she stirred her spoon in her coffee cup. Her movements were meticulous but mechanical, as if each gesture was programmed to hide something deeper. Her brown hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her usually light expression seemed burdened by thoughts she didn't verbalize. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, smiling as he always did, his presence warming the room. He loved her deeply, it was evident in the way his eyes shone when he looked at her. Already awake? I thought you were going to sleep late tonight, Clara commented, disguising her surprise. Nicholas shrugged. I guess habit spoke louder. And, of course, the smell of your coffee. There's something about your way of doing things that I never tire of praising. Clara smiled back, but the smile seemed forced. For a moment, Nicholas felt that something was slipping through his wife's words, but he decided not to press. He was known for his patience, and the silence between the two of them never bothered him. On the contrary, he interpreted it as a comfortable space, built up over years of living together. The couple had been together for over a decade. They met on an ordinary afternoon in a small cafe, an encounter that initially seemed casual, but which evolved into an unbreakable connection, or at least that's how Nicholas saw it. Clara had always been a mystery to him. Although they were compatible in many ways, she had an emotional depth that she rarely shared. Nicholas, on the other hand, was an open book, expressive and optimistic, balancing the two opposing worlds that together formed a stable marriage. Their home was a cozy refuge. Located in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors, it was a reflection of the choices they had made together. Abstract pictures that Clara painted in her spare time adorned the walls, while the dark wooden furniture contrasted with the natural light that flooded the rooms. Everything there told a story about how the couple had built a comfortable and apparently happy life. That morning, Nicholas was particularly excited. He had planned a trip to celebrate their upcoming wedding anniversary. It was something simple, but meaningful, a weekend in a luxury hotel in a nearby town, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Clara listened to his plans as she sipped her coffee, nodding and smiling at the right moments, but something in her reaction seemed disconnected. "What? You don't like the idea?" Nicholas asked, leaning forward. He could always tell when something wasn't right. "It's not that. It's just. I didn't expect it." "You always surprise me," Clara said, lightly touching his hand, as if trying to dispel any suspicion that something was wrong. The day's routine began like any other. Nicholas went to work at his small architecture firm, while Clara went to the gallery where she worked as a curator. Despite their daily occupations, the two had flexible enough schedules for evening dinners and weekends together. However, Clara had been moving further and further away from these occasions, citing tiredness or unexpected commitments. Nicholas noticed, but never insisted, preferring to believe that it was just a phase. While Clara was organizing a new exhibition at the gallery, her phone vibrated discreetly in her coat pocket. She checked the screen quickly, making sure no one was around before answering the message with quick fingers. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she had to take a deep breath to regain her composure. Nicholas, on the other hand, spent the day immersed in projects, but his thoughts often returned to Clara. He wondered if the monotony of everyday life wasn't weighing her down. In his mind, he thought of ways to rekindle the passion of their first years of marriage, to remind her that everything they had built was still worthwhile. He had always been a dedicated man, willing to face any obstacle to protect what he loved. That evening, dinner was especially quiet. Clara seemed distant, fiddling with her food without really eating. Nicholas tried to break the ice with a few jokes, but they didn't have the expected effect. Finally, he sighed and faced her. "Clara, is everything all right? You seem worried lately. If anything's going on, you can tell me." She looked up, hesitating for a moment before answering. "It's nothing, just work. It's all right, really." Nicholas wanted to believe her, but something in Clara's eyes made him uneasy. So he decided not to press any further. He believed in mutual trust, a pillar that had always supported their relationship. Over the next few days, the distance between them seemed to grow. Clara was more reserved, while Nicholas made an effort to keep things light and pleasant. He started planning surprises, little gestures that he hoped would bring back the Clara he knew. Flowers delivered in the middle of the day, notes left on the bathroom mirror, even a candlelit dinner at home. Clara thanked him, but his response was always restrained, as if there was an invisible barrier that Nicholas couldn't cross. One day, while organizing paperwork for work, Nicholas found a small card he had written to Clara at the beginning of their marriage. "You are the best chapter of my life," it read. He smiled as he remembered how true that sentiment was. He loved Clara deeply and would do anything to protect her, or so he believed. Meanwhile, Clara was facing an internal storm. Torn between what she knew was right and the tortuous paths she had taken, she wondered how things had come to this. She knew that Nicholas deserved nothing but loyalty and love, but there were forces at play that seemed bigger than her. On Friday night, Nicholas showed up with a bottle of wine and a radiant expression. He wanted Clara to relax, for the two of them to reconnect. Sitting on the sofa, with a soft jazz playlist playing in the background, he started talking about the future, about the plans he had for them. "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here," he said, looking into her eyes. Clara looked away, her hands clenching her wine glass. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She mumbled an "I know" and smiled weakly, while Nicholas, unaware of his wife's internal struggle, felt that he had finally regained some of the connection he had valued so much. What he didn't know was that the days of apparent normality were numbered. The silence between them hid more than he could have imagined, and the events to come would change their lives forever. The week that followed was a silent test for Nicholas. He realized that Clara was more distant than ever, but every time he tried to confront her about it, she deflected the subject. He refused to believe that something deeper could be wrong. In Nicholas' mind, Clara was just dealing with some personal issue that she would eventually resolve. He was patient by nature, but the invisible tension in the house was beginning to test the limits of that patience. Clara, on the other hand, was experiencing a growing internal conflict. The nights were longer than the days, spent staring at the ceiling in her bedroom or the illuminated screen of her cell phone. There were moments when she wanted to confess, to end the weight she was carrying. But the consequences scared her. She knew Nicholas well enough to know that he was loyal and devoted, but she also understood that some things, once done, could not be undone. This paralyzed her. One day, Nicholas decided to take action. He knew that Clara liked to escape from routine when she felt under pressure. So he planned a surprise dinner at a restaurant they both used to frequent in the early years of their marriage. Clara accepted the invitation without much enthusiasm, but Nicholas decided not to take it as a bad sign. He believed that, with a little effort, he could recover the connection that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. The restaurant was almost empty, with low lights and candles on every table. Clara looked as elegant as ever, but there was something about the way her eyes avoided his that bothered him. During dinner, Nicholas tried to make light conversation, but Clara seemed distracted, answering in a monosyllabic way. He finally plucked up the courage to ask her something he'd been thinking about. "Clara, are you happy?" The question was direct, blunt, and took Clara by surprise. She dropped her fork onto her plate and looked at him, searching for words. "Why are you asking that?" She tried to keep her voice calm, but Nicholas noticed her hesitation. "Because I feel like you're not here." "Not really. Like something's pushing you away. And, honestly, it's killing me." He didn't raise his tone, but the intensity in his words was palpable. Clara took a deep breath, fiddling with her napkin. "Nicholas, it's not you. I just have a lot on my mind. Work, the gallery, expectations. Maybe I just need a bit of time." Nicholas nodded, but his heart was tight. He knew Clara well enough to know that there was more than she was willing to admit. As the days passed, Nicholas began to notice small details that hadn't bothered him before, but now seemed to accumulate in his mind. Clara was spending more time on her cell phone, often leaving the room to take calls or answer them quickly when he was around. One evening, he noticed that she had tidied up more carefully than usual before leaving for an appointment at the gallery. "Do you need help with anything there?" he asked casually as he watched her apply lipstick. "No, it's just a last-minute meeting with a supplier." "No big deal," Clara replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. Nicholas tried not to think about it too much, but something inside him began to grow, a feeling he couldn't explain, a mixture of doubt and fear. One afternoon, while Clara was out, Nicholas, almost on impulse, decided to tidy up their room. He found her cell phone forgotten on the dresser. He hesitated for a moment, trying to convince himself that trusting Clara was the right thing to do. But doubt, like a serpent, enveloped him. He unlocked the device and opened the messages. What he saw made his stomach turn. There were frequent exchanges with an unidentified number, full of emojis, affectionate words and a tone that left no doubt. His heart raced, but he forced himself to keep reading. Messages suggested meeting at specific times, and one of them mentioned a hotel. Nicholas felt his throat go dry. He put his cell phone back and left the house, unsure of what to do. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts: confront Clara directly or wait for more evidence. He refused to believe it, but the messages were there, undeniable. Over the next few days, Nicholas began to pay more attention to Clara's schedule and her excuses for leaving the house. He even hired a private detective, something he never thought he would do. The idea of spying on her seemed repugnant, but he needed the truth, complete and without room for doubt. The detective acted quickly. In a matter of days, Nicholas received an envelope containing photos. He looked at them with trembling hands, and the images confirmed his worst fears. Clara was in a hotel, in the company of another man. They were holding hands, entering the lobby, and then in a sequence of photos that clearly showed that there was no denying what was happening. Nicholas closed the envelope and stood still for a long time, staring at the wall. He didn't know what to do with the anger that was growing inside him. It was a mixture of pain, betrayal and the overwhelming feeling of having been naive. That night, Clara returned home as if nothing had happened. Nicholas watched her in silence as she put her bag on the living room table and sat down on the sofa, apparently tired. He wanted to shout, to confront her, to demand explanations, but something stopped him. He realized that he didn't want to act on impulse. He needed to think of a plan, something that would give him control of the situation, even for a moment. "Clara," he called out, in a firmer voice than he had intended. "Yes." She looked at him, with an innocent look that almost made him doubt what he knew. "I want you to take the weekend off. We need to talk, but not here." "I thought we'd go to the hotel I booked for our anniversary," he said, with frightening calm. Clara hesitated, but agreed. Nicholas knew he needed this time to organize his next steps. He wanted to confront her, but he also wanted her to know that he wouldn't be a passive victim. On Friday night, as Clara prepared to go out with Nicholas, he already had a plan in mind. He made sure that the hotel's chambermaid would receive a special envelope to be delivered directly to the room they would be staying in. The contents of the envelope were simple but devastating: the photos taken by the detective, accompanied by a short, direct letter. Nicholas and Clara arrived at the hotel, and while she looked uncomfortable, he kept his composure. He knew that the truth was about to emerge inescapably. He would just have to wait for the right moment to see her reaction. The silence in the room was heavy, interrupted only by the sound of Clara's breathing, who seemed to realize that something was wrong. When the wardrobe knocked on the door, Nicholas stood up to receive the envelope. He handed it to Clara, who opened it with hesitant hands. Her eyes widened as she read, and the photos fell to the floor. Nicholas, standing in front of her, didn't say a word. He just stared at her, waiting for her to speak. But Clara remained silent. A silence that said more than any words. Clara stood motionless as the papers fell from her hands. The letter and the photos scattered on the floor seemed to shout the words she couldn't pronounce. Nicholas, standing in front of her, watched her with an expression that mixed frightening calm and undeniable sadness. There were no angry outbursts or shouts, just that look that seemed to run through Clara like a silent blade. "Do you have anything to say, Clara?" asked Nicholas, his voice firm but low. The weight of tension in the air was overwhelming, and the silence that followed was even more deafening. Clara tried to speak, but no words seemed enough. She wanted to explain, justify, perhaps even beg. But the look in Nicholas' eyes made it clear that he knew everything. That any attempt to hide anything now would be futile. He didn't need to hear the story, he already knew it, and his pain was visible. "Please, Nicholas, She finally broke the silence, but her voice was shaking. "I didn't want it to be like this." Nicholas gave a short, dry laugh, as if those words were more absurd than tragic. "You didn't want it to be like this?" And how did you imagine it would be, Clara? Did you plan it? Or did you just let it happen, as if nothing mattered? As if I didn't matter. Nicholas' words were like sharp knives, each one hitting Clara with precision. She lowered her gaze, unable to face him. He took a few steps back, crossing his arms, as if to create a physical barrier between them. I loved you, Clara. For years, I put you above everything else. You were my priority, my world. And now I find out that you've chosen that. You chose someone else. His voice finally began to waver, revealing anger mixed with despair. It was a mistake, murmured Clara, as if those words could erase everything. I was lost. I didn't know how, a mistake. Lost? Nicholas interrupted her, his voice now louder. That's not a mistake, Clara. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. That's a choice. A series of choices that you made consciously. Clara finally looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. Nicholas, I never meant to hurt you. Hurt? Clara, you've destroyed everything. And the worst thing is that, while you were living this lie, I believed we still had something special. I believed we were just going through a phase. Nicholas began to pace around the room, as if movement could help him deal with the avalanche of emotions that was consuming him. He ran his hands through his hair and took a deep breath before continuing. I was an idiot, Clara. Every time you left, every lame excuse, I believed it. Because trusting you was the only thing that made sense to me. But now I see that it was all an illusion. It wasn't an illusion. Clara shouted, for the first time showing any reaction other than guilt. What we had was real. I loved you, Nicholas. I still love you. He stopped abruptly and stared at her. Love? You call that love? Love is choosing someone every day, even in the most difficult times. Love isn't about looking for someone else when things get tough. Clara covered her face with her hands, her breathing irregular as the tears continued to fall. She knew there was no justification. She knew that her actions had irreversible consequences. After a long silence, Nicholas approached her. Tell me something, Clara. Why? Why did you do it? She was slow to answer, her hands still covering her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. I felt forgotten. Lost. Like I didn't know who I was anymore. Nicholas shook his head in disbelief. Forgotten. I never stopped showing you how important you were to me. Never. If you felt that way, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you talk to me instead of looking for answers in someone else's arms? Clara tried to answer, but her words were lost in sobs. Nicholas sighed, running his hands over his face, trying to contain the pain that seemed to overwhelm him. Do you know what's worse? He continued, his voice now softer, but still laden with pain. I would have understood. If you had told me what you were feeling, what you needed, I would have done anything to help you. Anything, Clara. But now it's too late. Clara felt the weight of those words like a blow. She knew he was right, but the guilt and regret were overwhelming. Nicholas, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want to fight for us. Please give me a chance to make it right. He looked at her for a long moment, his face a mixture of pain and tiredness. Fix it? Do you think it can be fixed? I don't know if I can look at you the same way. Not after this. The silence that followed was like a sentence. Clara knew that she had lost something that she would never be able to fully recover. And Nicholas, although he still loved her in some way, felt that love was now tainted by a betrayal that could never be erased. Before Clara could say anything else, Nicholas picked up the envelope with the photos from the floor and put it away. He turned to the door, pausing for a moment before leaving. I'm going out for a while. I need some space to think. His voice was calm but final. He opened the door and left, leaving Clara alone in the room, surrounded by the weight of her choices. Alone, Clara collapsed on the floor, crying uncontrollably. She knew that, as much as she wanted to go back in time, the damage had already been done. And now, she would have to deal with the consequences. Outside, Nicholas took a deep breath as he walked down the hotel corridor. He knew that the next stage would be even more difficult, but there was still something he needed to do. Something he had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The secret he had discovered was about to change everything, for Clara, for his lover and, above all, for himself. Nicholas walked slowly through the dark streets, feeling the icy night wind cut into his skin. Each step seemed to carry the weight of the last few hours, a weight he still didn't know how to deal with. Clara's words echoed in his mind like an off-key melody, confused, fragile, full of regret. But above all, he felt the pain of a love transformed into something unrecognizable. He stopped on a small bench in the square, staring at the emptiness in front of him. Why did it still hurt so much? Why, even after everything he had seen and heard, did a part of him want to believe that there was something to save? Nicholas shook his head, trying to rid himself of these thoughts. He knew he couldn't give in to it. Not after what he had discovered. That morning, before leaving for the hotel, the detective had given him not only the photos, but also information about the man Clara was meeting. At first, Nicholas thought it would be just another painful detail of the betrayal, but as he examined the report, he realized something that would completely change the way he viewed the situation. And now, he knew he had to face not just Clara, but the man who had crossed the line with his wife. Back in the hotel room, Clara sat on the floor, her eyes fixed on the photos Nicholas had dropped when he left. Each image seemed to shout out her faults, her mistakes, the chasm she herself had dug between the two of them. She didn't know what Nicholas would do next, and that terrified her. But even more than the fear of what was to come, she was gripped by an overwhelming guilt. For the first time, Clara felt she was about to lose everything that really mattered, and she knew it was her own fault. The sound of her phone vibrating on the bedside table snapped her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her lover, whose name she was reluctant to face. "Is everything okay? Did you manage to speak to him?" the text read. Clara stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting the message without replying. For the first time, she felt a revulsion she couldn't explain. As if, when she looked at his name, she saw only the reflection of her wrong choices. She took a deep breath and picked up the phone again, this time to call Nicholas. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Clara felt a knot in her stomach as she left a message, her voice weak and hesitant. "Nicholas, please call me. We need to talk. I know you hate me now, but I need you to know that I'm willing to do anything to try and make this right." Meanwhile, Nicholas was already in another hotel, much simpler and further away, where he knew he would find Clara's lover. He had called the man for a meeting under the pretext of a professional meeting, something he knew would arouse the interest of someone with the guy's ambitious profile. Nicholas didn't plan violence, it had never been in his nature. But he needed to look the man in the eye, to hear his voice, to understand who the person was who had crossed that line. The hotel lobby was small, with fluorescent lights that gave the room a cold, impersonal feel. Nicholas waited for a few minutes until the man entered, straightening his tie and looking around, probably looking for his supposed business contact. When their gazes met, Nicholas saw an instant of recognition and then discomfort on the other man's face. "So you're the man," said Nicholas, without raising his voice. "The man who thought he could invade my life without consequences." The lover hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. "I didn't know that we would meet like this. I'm sorry for any pain this may have caused." Nicholas laughed, a bitter laugh that seemed to resonate in the small space. "Are you sorry? Are you sorry? Don't give me empty excuses. I want to know why. Why did you do it? Why did you think you could meddle in my life, in my wife, as if it were some kind of game?" The man tried to explain, mumbling something about not having planned anything, about the feelings that had arisen between him and Clara. But Nicholas didn't want to hear excuses or justifications. He wanted the truth, raw and inescapable. You knew she was married. You knew she had someone. And yet you went ahead. For what? Just for pleasure? For ego? Or because you thought you could simply replace me? The lover, visibly uncomfortable, tried again to defend himself, but Nicholas interrupted him. I'll tell you what you don't know, he said, his voice low and intense. You weren't the only traitor in this story. While Nicholas confronted his lover, Clara was at home, trying to process everything that had happened. She reread the message she had deleted earlier and wondered if she should reply, but something stopped her. For the first time in months, she realized how far she had strayed from what really mattered. She looked at the photos again, feeling the pain of each image like a blow. But at the same time, something inside her began to change. Clara realized that, although she had betrayed Nicholas in an unforgivable way, the real betrayal had begun much earlier. She had betrayed his trust, yes, but she had also betrayed herself, the values she thought she stood for. Clara decided that, whatever happened to their marriage, she needed to face her mistakes head-on. Not to win Nicholas back, but to understand how she had become the person who had hurt him so deeply. The meeting between Nicholas and his lover ended coldly and silently. After saying what he needed to, Nicholas left the hotel without looking back. He knew that this man deserved nothing more than the contempt he felt for him. But as he drove home, Nicholas sensed that the real confrontation was yet to come. He would have to face Clara again, and this time, without masks, without half-words. When he arrived home, he found Clara sitting in the living room, her eyes fixed on the door as if she was waiting for him. When he came in, she got up immediately, but didn't say anything. Nicholas dropped his keys on the table and stared at her for a long moment before speaking. We need to talk. Now, no beating around the bush, no excuses. Just the truth. Clara nodded, her face a mixture of fear and determination. She knew there was no escape. The words that would come next would define not only their future, but also who she would be from then on. And at that moment, they both knew they were about to face something that would change everything. Nicholas and Clara stood face to face in the living room, a once familiar environment that now seemed cold and strange, as if neither of them belonged there anymore. The silence between them was dense, filled with everything that hadn't been said over the years. Clara stood with her hands trembling, while Nicholas leaned against the wall, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on her. There was no longer anger in his eyes, but something more devastating, a deep and unshakable disappointment. I'll start, said Nicholas, breaking the silence. His voice was firm but controlled. I'm not going to waste any more time with rhetorical questions. I just want the truth. All of it. If you have something to hide, I suggest you tell me now. Clara took a deep breath, the tears already tingling in the corners of her eyes. She knew she couldn't go on protecting herself behind lies or half-truths. I made a mistake, Nicholas. And I know that doesn't fix anything. But I was lost. I thought that I could find something outside of our marriage that would bring me back to myself. Nicholas took a small step forward, still maintaining the emotional distance he had built up between them. And did you? Did you find what you were looking for, Clara? The question, simple and direct, made Clara collapse. She sat down on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. No. All I found was regret, pain and this unbearable distance between us. I didn't want that, Nicholas. I never wanted to lose you. He watched her in silence for a long moment before speaking again. But you knew that's exactly what would happen, didn't you? Nobody goes into something like this thinking they're going to come out of it unscathed. What hurts me most, Clara, is not what you did, but what it represents. You replaced me. You replaced everything we built. Clara lifted her face, tears staining her cheeks. It wasn't that. It was never about replacing you. It was about me. About my inability to see what we already had. I know that sounds selfish, because it was selfish. But, Nicholas, I love you. I always have. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Love, Clara. Love isn't selfish. Love doesn't destroy. What you've done isn't love. For a moment, Clara wanted to argue, but she realized that he was right. There was no justification that could erase the choices she had made. She had to accept that, even if it hurt more than anything else. Nicholas let out a long sigh before walking away. He picked up an envelope he had brought with him and placed it on the table. Clara stared at him with a puzzled look. "What's this?" she asked hesitantly. "Divorce papers," Nicholas replied bluntly. "I was already prepared for that. You know as well as I do that there's no going back. Not after what happened." Clara felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. She knew that divorce was a possibility, but hearing Nicholas' words made it real, inescapable. "Nicholas, please, can we try? Can we get help, therapy, anything?" He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes showing a mixture of pain and resignation. "I've thought about it. Believe me, I have. But the truth is that I can't trust you. And without trust, there is no marriage." The words were like a final sentence for Clara. She nodded silently, accepting what she could no longer change. I sign," she said, her voice weak. "But please know that I'm sorry for everything. For us. For you." Nicholas looked away, swallowing. He didn't reply. In the days that followed, Clara stayed at home, alone, while Nicholas moved into a small temporary apartment. He knew he needed space to rebuild his life, away from the place that now brought him more pain than comfort. The nights were difficult, he often found himself reliving moments from the past, times when everything seemed so perfect. But with time, he began to realize that he needed to look forward. Clara, on the other hand, plunged into a deep period of reflection. She cut all ties with her lover and began attending therapy sessions alone. Not because she hoped to win Nicholas back, but because she knew she needed to face her own demons. Little by little, she began to find fragments of herself that she had lost over the years, but she knew it was too late to save the marriage. A few months later, Nicholas found something unexpected, a new chance at happiness. He met Rachel, a work colleague he had always admired from afar. Rachel was kind, intelligent and, above all, sincere. They started out as friends, but over time a deeper connection emerged. Nicholas realized that, despite all the pain, he was still capable of loving, and being loved. Clara, for her part, decided to start over in a different place. She moved to a smaller town, where she could focus on her work as a curator and rebuild her identity away from the weight of her mistakes. Although she never stopped missing Nicholas, she accepted that his loss was the price of her choices. Clara's lover, on the other hand, faced the consequences of his role in the betrayal. He discovered that Nicholas had revealed his infidelity to others, damaging his professional and personal reputation. He lost important contracts and was forced to change careers, facing an uncertain future. At the end of it all, Nicholas found himself at peace. Not because the pain had completely disappeared, but because he knew how to turn his suffering into strength. He knew that the betrayal had left its marks, but those marks led him down a new path, where he finally found what he really deserved: honesty, trust and true love. What about you? What did you think of this story? Comment your opinion below. We want to know what you think about the characters and their choices. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. And remember, we don't support any kind of betrayal here. These stories are fictional and aim to show the consequences of choices and how they can profoundly affect people's lives. See you next time.